Maya never expected a normal school day to turn into her worst nightmare. A police officer grabbed a pair of scissors and cut her hair against her will, humiliating her in front of everyone. He thought he could get away with it. He thought no one would stop him. But what he didn't know, Maya's father was a federal judge, and when her father found out what happened, the entire school would never be the same again. The halls of Fairview High School were bustling as students moved between classes, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughter and conversation filling the air. But in one corner of the hallway, standing rigid near the principal's office, 14-year-old Maya Brooks wasn't laughing. Her fingers trembled as she touched her hair, or what was left of it. Strands of her once beautiful curls lay scattered on the floor beside her, hacked unevenly, jagged, butchered by a pair of scissors that never should have been used on her. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident. It had all started earlier that afternoon when Officer Greg Lawson, the school's resource officer, had pulled her aside after gym class. His expression had been stern, his voice sharp. "That hair of yours is a distraction," he had said, eyeing her voluminous curls like they were a crime. "You need to do something about it," Maya had protested. "It's just my hair." But Officer Lawson wasn't listening. He had pulled her into the principal's office, away from her friends, away from anyone who might step in. Then, without warning, he grabbed a pair of scissors from the desk, and right there, he started cutting. Maya had frozen, too shocked to react as strands of her hair fell around her shoulders, landing silently on the cold tile floor. Her breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred, her entire body numb with disbelief. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything, but she felt powerless. When he was done, he tossed the scissors onto the desk and crossed his arms. "There," he said, like he had done her a favor. "Now it's not a problem anymore." Tears burned at the corners of Maya's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She had never felt so violated, so humiliated. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, he smirked. "You can call your parents if you want," he added, his voice laced with amusement, "but I doubt they'll do much about it." Maya inhaled sharply, her hands curling into fists. Officer Lawson had made one critical mistake. He didn't know who her father was, and when he found out, he would regret ever picking up those scissors. Maya sat in the principal's office, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair, as she fought back the wave of emotions threatening to crash over her. Anger, humiliation, disbelief, it all churned inside her, a storm she couldn't control. She could still feel the ghost of the scissors against her scalp, the rough, merciless way Officer Lawson had hacked away at her curls like they were nothing, like she was nothing. Across from her, Principal Edwards avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He had been there when it happened, had watched it unfold, but he hadn't stopped it. Now he cleared his throat, finally speaking. "Maya, I know this situation is upsetting, but Officer Lawson was just enforcing school policy. Some hairstyles can be distracting to other students, and..." Maya shot him a look so sharp it cut through his weak excuse like a blade. "You're really going to defend this?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "He cut my hair against my will. That's not enforcing a rule, that's assault." Principal Edwards exhaled, rubbing his temple like this was an inconvenience rather than a violation of her dignity. "Maya, I think we should call your parents." Maya's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Yeah, let's call my dad." She could see the dismissiveness in his eyes. He thought calling her father would end this, that it would be a quick conversation, an apology at best, and then everything would be swept under the rug like it never happened. But he had no idea. Maya picked up the office phone, dialed the number by heart, and held it to her ear. 3 rings. Then, a deep, commanding voice answered. "Maya, you okay?" That voice alone sent Principal Edwards shifting uneasily. But Maya wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking straight at Officer Lawson, who stood near the doorway, arms crossed, that same condescending smirk still on his face. "Dad," Maya said, keeping her tone steady, controlled, "I need you to come to the school. Now." There was a slight pause on the other end, just for a second. Then, in a voice so calm it was terrifying, her father said, "I'm on my way." Maya hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. Across the room, Officer Lawson still wasn't taking this seriously. He looked amused, like this was just another student making a fuss over nothing, like her father was just another average parent who would show up, yell a little, then leave with nothing resolved. Maya almost felt sorry for him, because Officer Lawson didn't know that her father was federal judge Christopher Brooks, and within the hour, this school would learn exactly what happens when you violate the daughter of one of the most powerful legal minds in the state. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Maya sat still, but inside, her anger simmered just beneath the surface. She didn't need to say anything else. She had made the call. Now, she just had to wait. Principal Edwards tapped his fingers against his desk, glancing at the clock like he was counting down the seconds until this situation would blow over. Officer Lawson remained by the door, arms still crossed, still smug. He didn't seem worried in the slightest. Maya almost wanted to laugh, because what neither of them understood, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the man who was about to walk through those doors wasn't just another angry parent. He was a man who had built his career on taking down people who abused their power. He was a man who had dedicated his life to holding authority figures accountable. And today, that included a racist school cop who thought he could humiliate a black girl and walk away without consequences. The front doors of the school slammed open. The sound echoed through the hall. Everyone turned. There, standing in the entryway, was Judge Christopher Brooks. The moment he stepped inside, the entire atmosphere shifted. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored navy suit that commanded respect. His presence alone was enough to make people straighten up, to make the staff whisper nervously among themselves. But it wasn't just how he looked, it was how he carried himself. His strides were slow, measured, powerful, a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to make people listen. Principal Edwards stood abruptly, nearly knocking over a stack of papers. Judge Brooks? Christopher didn't even look at him. His gaze was locked onto Maya. In 2 strides, he was by her side, crouching down to meet her at eye level. You okay? His voice was low, steady, but Maya knew him well enough to hear the rage just beneath the surface. She lifted her chin. He cut my hair, Dad. He grabbed scissors and just... Her voice wavered, but she refused to cry. He said it was a distraction. Christopher's jaw tightened. Slowly, he turned his head, his piercing gaze finally landing on Officer Lawson, who, for the first time, looked less sure of himself. Maya saw it, the slight shift in his stance, the flicker of unease in his eyes. Oh, now he was realizing who he had messed with. Now he was piecing it together. Christopher stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You assaulted my daughter, he said, his tone even but heavy. And you thought there wouldn't be consequences. Officer Lawson's smug expression cracked. Now hold on, he stammered, taking a small step back. This is all being blown out of proportion. I was just enforcing school policy. Her hair... Christopher took a step forward. Say one more word about her hair, he said quietly, and I will make sure the only job you ever qualify for again is security at a parking lot. Silence. Maya could practically feel the power shift in the room. Principal Edwards swallowed hard, his face pale. Judge Brooks, let's all just take a moment to calm down. Christopher turned sharply. Calm down. You stood by and let a police officer violate a student's bodily autonomy and you think I should be calm? Principal Edwards flinched. Christopher exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. Then, in a voice controlled but lethal, he said, You will call the school board. You will call the police department. You will have this man removed from this campus immediately. Principal Edwards nodded so fast it looked painful. Yes, of course. Christopher's eyes flicked back to Officer Lawson, his gaze razor-sharp. You're going to regret ever touching my daughter. And for the first time that day, Maya saw fear in Officer Lawson's face. The tension in the office was suffocating. Principal Edwards fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed the school board. The secretary outside had already alerted the district superintendent, and whispers had started spreading through the halls like wildfire. Judge Christopher Brooks was in the building, and he was furious. Maya stayed seated, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap, but inside, she was watching every second unfold with sharp awareness. She had never seen her father like this, not yelling, not throwing threats recklessly, but controlling the entire room with his presence alone. Officer Lawson, who had been so smug, so certain of his power, was no longer smirking. He was stiff, his jaw locked, his hands clenched behind his back as if trying to maintain what little control he had left. But it was slipping. Christopher Brooks had handled real criminals, corrupt officials, dirty cops. This this was just another man who thought he was untouchable. Until today. The office phone rang. Principal Edwards snatched it up like it was a lifeline, his voice rushed and eager to appease. "Yes, Superintendent Harper, we have a situation. Judge Brooks is here regarding an incident with Officer Lawson and his daughter." "Yes. No, I completely understand. I'll inform him right away." He hung up, swallowing hard before turning to Christopher. "Sir, the superintendent has requested to speak with you directly. He's on his way now." Christopher gave a slow, deliberate nod, but said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention back to Officer Lawson. "Let's talk about what happens next." Lawson squared his shoulders, feigning confidence. "I did my job. The school has policies." Christopher cut him off with a single look. "You didn't enforce a policy. You took a child's bodily autonomy into your own hands and humiliated her. You touched my daughter without her consent. You used force where none was necessary. Do you understand what that means legally?" He tilted his head, his voice eerily calm. "That means I could have you arrested for assault and misconduct. That means I could have you charged for abuse of authority. That means your career would be over by the time the sun sets today." Lawson's face twitched. The confidence was gone. Christopher took another step closer, lowering his voice so only Lawson could hear. "And trust me, you have no idea the lengths I'm willing to go to make sure that happens." Maya watched as Lawson's skin paled. This wasn't just a simple school dispute anymore. This was a legal disaster waiting to happen, and he knew it. Before Lawson could form a response, the door swung open. Superintendent Daniel Harper stepped in, his face tight with concern. He was an older man, known for keeping things orderly, quiet, handled. But nothing about this moment was going to be quiet. "Judge Brooks," Harper said, extending a hand, which Christopher didn't take. "I was just briefed on the situation, and I want to personally assure you that we are taking this very seriously." His eyes flickered to Lawson, and for the first time, there was an edge of disapproval. "Officer Lawson, you are to leave this building immediately while we conduct an internal investigation. Hand in your badge and your clearance card." Lawson's lips parted like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. Slowly, he unhooked his badge, placing it on the desk with a quiet clink. Christopher wasn't done. "He's not just leaving the building. I want his suspension publicly recorded. I want his actions on file. And I want a formal acknowledgement from the district that what happened here was unacceptable." Superintendent Harper hesitated. "That's quite a request." Christopher stared him down. "No, it's quite reasonable. Unless, of course, you want this school to be the subject of a civil lawsuit, a media scandal, and a full investigation into the hiring practices of your security officers." A long silence stretched between them. Harper cleared his throat. "I'll see to it personally." Christopher nodded once. Then, finally, he turned to Maya. His expression softened, his voice losing its edge. "You ready to go?" Maya met his gaze, holding her head high. She had come into this office humiliated, powerless, a victim of someone else's abuse of authority. But she wasn't leaving that way. She was leaving as a girl who had just watched her father dismantle the very system that had tried to strip her of her dignity. She stood up. "Yeah, I'm ready." And as they walked out of the office, past the whispers, past the stunned faces, past the students who had overheard what had just happened, Maya knew one thing for sure. Officer Lawson had thought he was untouchable, but today he learned that no one is above consequences. The ride home was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence filled with tension or unanswered questions. It was the kind of silence where things settled, where the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air, but Maya no longer felt powerless. She stared out the window, running her fingers through what was left of her hair, feeling the uneven, jagged ends where Officer Lawson had hacked away at it. The thought alone sent a fresh wave of anger through her, but she knew He wasn't getting away with it. Her father drove with a steady grip on the wheel, his expression unreadable, but Maya had grown up watching him. She knew that look. It was the same one he wore when he was preparing for a court case, when he was planning his next move before anyone else even realized the game had begun. He had already made up his mind about what was coming next. Finally, he spoke. "You know this isn't over, right?" Maya nodded. "I figured." Christopher glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "I'm pressing charges." It wasn't a question. It wasn't up for debate. He had already decided. Maya swallowed, her heart racing slightly. What's going to happen to him? Her father exhaled through his nose, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. Best case for him? He loses his job and never works in law enforcement again. Worst case? He faces criminal charges for using force on a minor without cause. Either way, he's going to learn that power doesn't protect people like him when they abuse it. Maya didn't respond right away, letting those words sink in. She had spent the entire day feeling humiliated, violated, stripped of the small pieces of control she had over herself. But now, hearing her father talk so plainly about justice, real, tangible justice, she felt something else. Relief. Closure. The next morning, the news spread across the entire school. Officer Lawson had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The school board had issued a formal apology, not just to Maya, but to the entire student body, acknowledging that policies and enforcement practices would be reviewed. But the real blow came later that afternoon, when news broke that a lawsuit had been officially filed against the school and Officer Lawson himself. Maya walked through the halls with her head held high, feeling the shift in the air. People looked at her differently now. The whispers weren't of mockery or pity, they were of respect. A few students who had been there that day stopped her between classes, murmuring how proud they were, how they couldn't believe what had happened, how they were glad someone was finally doing something about it. And then, something even more unexpected happened. A girl, a freshman Maya barely knew, approached her by the lockers, looking hesitant. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet. I heard what happened." She glanced around as if making sure no one was listening. "I just wanted to say thank you. For standing up to him." Maya blinked. "You knew him?" The girl nodded, biting her lip. "He used to follow me around the halls for no reason. Made comments about my clothes, the way I walked. I didn't think I could say anything because, well, he was a cop." She looked up, meeting Maya's gaze. "But you did. And now he's gone." Maya felt her chest tighten. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for others too. Later that evening, her father handed her an envelope. She frowned, flipping it open to find a handwritten apology letter from Principal Edwards. She scanned the words, barely believing what she was reading. A full admission of wrongdoing, a promise to enforce stricter policies on staff conduct, a direct acknowledgement that what had happened to her was unacceptable. Maya folded the letter carefully, setting it on the table. Her father watched her, his sharp eyes assessing, always reading between the lines. "You okay?" She nodded, exhaling. "Yeah, I think I am." He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment before giving a small, approving nod. "Good, because people like Lawson thrive when they think no one will challenge them. You changed that." Maya looked down at the letter again, then back at him. "You changed that." Christopher gave her a rare smile, small but filled with pride. "Number you did." And for the first time since that horrible moment in the office, Maya didn't feel humiliated. She didn't feel like a victim. She felt powerful.